The chamber was still, but Kellyanne Conway's voice sliced through it like a blade. Her words weren't just sharp, they were calculated, dipped in the smugness of someone who had played this game for decades. She leaned into the microphone, eyes narrowing, tone dripping with dismissal, as if to say, "You don't belong here." Members of Congress shifted uncomfortably, staffers whispered, and the cameras zoomed in. Hungry for every flicker of tension, Conway thrived in this arena. The seasoned manipulator who knew exactly how to twist language into a weapon. She raised her hand, punctuating each word with practiced precision, her tone suggesting authority that dared anyone to challenge her. But across from her sat Jasmine Crockett, moved, unshaken, while others might have shrunk under the weight of Conway's scorn. Crockett's steady gaze told a different story. She was not here to bow, she was here to stand. The silence between each jab felt heavier than the words themselves. You could hear the clicking of pens, the faint hum of cameras, the low rustle of papers being gripped just a little too tightly. The tension was not just in the room, it was across the country, spilling into every screen where Americans were watching. This wasn't just an exchange of words, it was a clash of worlds, the old guard of manipulation against the rising force of truth. And in that frozen moment, just before Crockett opened her mouth, the chamber collectively held its breath. No one could have predicted how swiftly the balance of power would shift. This was no ordinary clash. Kellyanne Conway wasn't just another political figure, she was the architect of spin, the face of the Trump-era tactic that turned deflection into an art form. For years, she had thrived on bending truth until it cracked, leaving her opponents tangled in contradictions while she walked away untouched. To her, this moment in Congress was just another performance, another chance to dismiss and dominate. She believed her experience, her history of outmaneuvering critics, gave her the upper hand. But this wasn't 2017. The country had changed, the room had changed, and sitting across from her was Jasmine Crockett, a voice shaped not by media coaching or political theater, but by lived struggle and relentless accountability. Crockett was part of a new wave, fearless, unfiltered, unwilling to let manipulation pass unchallenged. She wasn't intimidated by Conway's rehearsed scorn. She was fueled by it. Congress itself became more than a chamber that day. It transformed into a symbolic battlefield, one side armed with carefully crafted illusions, the other with the raw weight of truth. Every glare, every pause, every word carried stakes beyond the four walls of that room. This was about who gets to define reality in America, the seasoned spinners who dismiss, distort, and deflect, or the rising leaders who refuse to let deception go unchecked. Conway, in her confidence, didn't see it coming. She mistook Crockett's silence for weakness, her calm for hesitation. She thought she was tightening the noose. What she didn't realize was that Crockett wasn't backing away, she was preparing to strike, and not with noise or bluster, but with something Conway couldn't twist. Undeniable truth, for more than a decade. Kellyanne Conway carved her place in American politics, not through policy, expertise, or legislative achievements, but through her mastery of spin. She was the strategist who knew how to turn a losing argument into a headline, the media combatant who could dominate a Sunday talk show not with facts, but with unshakable confidence. Her name became synonymous with one phrase that still echoes across political memory: alternative facts. With those two words, she crystallized an era where truth became negotiable, and perception was everything. Conway's rise wasn't accidental. Trained as a pollster and steeped in the world of messaging, she learned early how to weaponize language. She could take a damning statistic and flip it into reassurance. She could turn a direct question into a rhetorical maze, leaving journalists stumbling while she smiled knowingly at the cameras. Her critics accused her of lying, gaslighting, manipulating, but her defenders saw her as brilliant, untouchable, even fearless. She embodied the Trump-era ethos: never admit defeat, never concede a point, always keep the fight alive. That confidence carried her into the center of power. As counselor to the president, she became not just a mouthpiece, but a symbol of deflection. In debates and interviews, her calm smirk, sharp tongue, and relentless pivoting left even seasoned journalists flustered. She didn't need to win with truth. She won with stamina, outlasting her opponents, draining them of energy until the spectacle itself became the story. But beneath the performance, the foundation was fragile. Her power depended on control of the narrative, on opponents who played by the rules while she rewrote them mid-game. The strength she projected came not from evidence, but from illusion. Not from honesty, but from the ability to bend reality until the audience gave up trying to untangle it. This legacy of manipulation followed her into every confrontation, every room where cameras rolled. To many, she was a villain, not evil in the cartoonish sense, but dangerous in her subtlety. She represented a political class that believed truth was malleable, that words mattered more than actions, that as long as you never broke composure, you never lost. So when Conway stepped into that congressional chamber to confront Jasmine Crockett, she carried all that history with her. She carried the reputation of someone who had danced circles around reporters, who had brushed off criticism with a sarcastic shrug, who had turned ridicule into branding. She entered with the confidence of someone who had seen it all and beaten it all. But history has a way of catching up. For every manipulator, there comes a moment when the script doesn't work, when the lines that once dazzled fall flat. Conway didn't know it yet, but this would be that moment. For the first time in years, she was about to face someone who wouldn't chase the bait, who wouldn't get lost in the maze of misdirection. Asterisk, long before she ever stepped into the marble halls of Congress, Jasmine Crockett learned the weight of fighting battles most people never even saw. Her story wasn't polished in think tanks or groomed in the corridors of elite institutions. It was forged in courtrooms where the stakes were life and death, in communities where justice too often came last, if at all. Raised in a family, Crockett grew up surrounded by examples of quiet resilience. She knew what it meant to watch people work hard and still struggle. She knew what it felt like to see neighbors dismissed, not because they lacked merit, but because of the color of their skin or the size of their bank account. Those early lessons planted something in her, a refusal to accept injustice as normal, and a determination to build a career that would turn pain into power. Her path took her to law school, where she faced the same doubts and dismissals that would follow her throughout her career. But rather than bending under pressure, she sharpened herself. She wasn't there to play the game of prestige. She was there to learn how to fight the systems that so often chewed people up and spit them out. When she graduated, she didn't chase corporate law or high-paying firms. She chose the harder road, taking on cases that gave voice to those who couldn't afford representation. In court, she became known for her grit. She wasn't the attorney who walked in with flowery speeches. She walked in with receipts, with preparation, with a fearlessness that came from knowing her clients' lives were on the line. Whether she was defending a young man overcharged for a petty crime or standing up to powerful local interests, Crockett built a reputation, the lawyer who wouldn't back down. But advocacy doesn't stop at the courtroom door. Crockett carried that same fire into activism, lending her voice to protests, organizing communities, standing on the front lines when others stayed in the safety of the sidelines. Her authenticity drew people in, not because she claimed to have all the answers, but because she never pretended to be above the struggle. She had lived it. Politics came later, not as an ambition, but as a necessity. She saw the same broken systems over and over again in her work, saw the way legislation often stacked the deck against the very people she fought for. Running for office wasn't about prestige. It was about bringing a fighter's voice inside, the very institution that so often ignored those outside its walls. And when she entered Congress, she didn't shed that outsider energy, she amplified it. Her colleagues quickly realized she was not someone who could be intimidated by tradition or decorum when justice was at stake. Crockett spoke with the cadence of someone who had lived the consequences of bad policy, not just studied them. Her sharp tongue and sharper mind became her trademarks, cutting through political doublespeak with a clarity that resonated far beyond Washington. Of course, that boldness earned her enemies. The old guard, the seasoned manipulators like Kellyanne Conway, often tried to frame her as inexperienced, unqualified, too fiery. But what they underestimated was the very thing that set her apart. She didn't need their approval to validate. Her voice, her legitimacy came from her lived struggle, her work in courtrooms, her advocacy in the streets. She was, in every sense, a fighter for the unheard. And that authenticity was her greatest weapon. Because unlike those who built careers on spin, Crockett had built hers on truth. She didn't have to bend reality to make her point. She just had to tell it. Kellyanne Conway leaned forward, her words dripping with the same cutting precision she had wielded for years. She smirked, dismissing Jasmine Crockett with the kind of tone meant to reduce, to belittle, to paint her as small. Each jab was designed not just to challenge her ideas, but to undermine her very presence. "You're new here," Conway scoffed, her voice pitched high enough for the cameras to catch. "Maybe if you spent less time chasing headlines and more time learning the ropes, you'd understand how this chamber really works." The room stiffened. Some members exchanged glances. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. It was the familiar theater of power and old hand trying to put a newcomer in her place. Conway's confidence filled the air like smoke, heavy and suffocating. She believed she had the upper hand, but Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She held her composure, her eyes locked on Conway with a steady, unbroken gaze. Where Conway's voice rose with performative flair, Crockett's silence was deliberate, almost surgical. It wasn't the silence of someone beaten, it was the silence of someone measuring the perfect moment to strike. Still, Conway pressed harder. She mocked Crockett's experience, sneered at her passion as if it were naivety, and wrapped it all in the dismissive veneer of a political veteran who had sparred with reporters, anchors, and opponents far more seasoned than this. The chamber hummed with unease. It was the sound of anticipation, of a room waiting to see whether Crockett would break or rise. And then Crockett's voice cut through, calm at first, almost to calm. Each word precise, each phrase layered with a quiet conviction that seemed to swell in the air. She didn't match Conway's mocking tone. She surpassed it with a clarity that pierced through the theatrics. Her voice wasn't just an answer, it was a challenge, a rebuke, a refusal to be diminished. The atmosphere shifted. Lawmakers leaned in, Reporters raised their pens. Even the gallery seemed to hold its breath. The clash had moved beyond words. It was now a test of presence, of who owned the moment. Conway threw out one last sneer, her eyes narrowing as if to say, "Is that all you've got?" And that was when it happened. Crockett paused. A pause so heavy, so loaded with unspoken force, that the entire chamber seemed to tilt toward her. In that heartbeat of silence, everyone understood. The attack had reached its limit, and now the counterattack was coming. The silence before Jasmine Crockett spoke was electric, an entire chamber suspended in air, waiting for the moment they didn't yet know was about to redefine the balance of power. Conway had finished her latest barb with a satisfied smirk, her shoulders squared, confident she had delivered the final word. But Crockett didn't rush to fill the space. She let it breathe, let it grow heavy. Every second of silence was deliberate, tightening the suspense until even the clicking cameras seemed to pause. And then, with a voice calm but resonant, Crockett began. "You know, Miss Conway," she said, her tone sharp yet steady, "I've spent my entire career watching how people like you twist words, bend facts, and then dress it all up as if it were truth. But truth," she leaned forward slightly, "doesn't bend. Truth doesn't spin. Truth stands." The chamber shifted. Lawmakers turned toward her. Even those inclined to dismiss her now found themselves riveted. Crockett continued, laying out fact after fact, pointing to Conway's infamous defense of alternative facts, reminding the chamber and the nation of the times spin had been used to justify chaos, division, even cruelty. She spoke not with rage, but with an almost surgical precision, cutting away the layers of manipulation Conway had built her reputation on. Conway's smirk began to falter. She tried to interject, but Crockett pressed on, her words unyielding. "You can call lies alternative facts. You can call manipulation strategy. But the people of this country, my people, the communities who raised me, who trusted me to stand here, know better. We live with the consequences of your spin. We bury the costs of your distortions. And we are done paying the price." Gasps rippled through the chamber. Crockett wasn't just defending herself, she was indicting Conway's entire legacy. And then, just as the weight of her words pressed down, Crockett reached for something deeper. Her eyes locked with Conway's, and her voice took on a solemn cadence, almost reverent. "You like to quote scripture when it suits you," she said. "But let's remember what it really says. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." She let the verse hang in the air, its resonance undeniable. "And the truth here, Miss Conway, is that your era of deception is over. Because when truth walks in the room, lies have no choice but to scatter." The chamber erupted not in applause, because rules forbade it, but in audible gasps, murmurs, the shuffling of papers, the sharp inhales of those who had just witnessed a moment. The tension was so thick it felt physical. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras zoomed in on Conway's face, and for the first time, the woman who had sparred with presidents, crushed media hosts, and spun circles around critics, looked cornered, her lips parted, as if to answer. But no words came. She searched for the next spin, the next quick retort, the line that would shift the energy back in her favor. But there was nothing. Crockett had pinned her, not with volume, not with insult, but with truth so sharp it cut through every layer of performance. And Crockett knew it. She didn't gloat, didn't smirk. She simply leaned back, her eyes unwavering, her silence now the final punctuation mark to the blow she had delivered. It was the silence of someone who knew she had won not just the argument, but the moment, the story, the history that would be written about this day. Around the chamber, the murmurs swelled, disbelief mixing with awe. Members glanced at each other as if to say, did that really just happen? For some, it was a moment of vindication. For others, it was a warning shot. But for everyone, it was unforgettable. Conway's face said it all. The confidence was gone. The grin replaced by the tightening of her jaw, the faintest flicker of unease in her eyes. She was, for once, speechless, and in that silence, Crockett had achieved what so many before her had tried and failed. She had dismantled the myth of Kellyanne Conway's untouchable rhetoric. It was, in every sense, a mic drop moment. But as the chamber slowly exhaled, as the murmurs turned into frantic whispers about what had just unfolded, one truth lingered above all. This was bigger than the walls of Congress, because outside those walls, beyond the chamber's marble columns and into the streets, the storm had only just begun. The moment Crockett's words echoed across the chamber, the reaction online was instantaneous. Within minutes, hashtags began trending worldwide. Hashtag Crockett clapback, hashtag truth overspin, and even the simple, explosive hashtag mic drop. Twitter feeds filled with clips of the exchange, cut into bite-sized reels and TikToks that looped endlessly. Replaying the exact second, Conway's face froze in stunned silence. Supporters swarmed to social media with a kind of cathartic relief. She spoke what we've all wanted to say. One viral post read, gathering hundreds of thousands of likes in hours. Another comment, pinned beneath the trending clip, declared, for once, someone didn't let the spin win. She fought back, and she won. Across Facebook groups, Instagram stories, and WhatsApp chats, Crockett's words were shared like a rallying cry, passed from person to person as proof that truth could still land a punch. But not everyone was celebrating. Conway's defenders leaped quickly into the fray, accusing Crockett of grandstanding, of disrespecting a public servant, and of turning Congress into a stage for cheap applause. Conservative pundits on cable news replayed the footage, with heavy scorn, attempting to spin the moment as yet another example of radical overreach. She may have silenced the room, one commentator said, but she won't silence America. That clash of narratives only fueled the fire. Late-night hosts seized on the footage, reenacting the exchange with biting satire. One joked, Conway used to bend facts until they snapped, but tonight, facts bent her. Celebrities chimed in on Instagram and TikTok, with musicians, actors, and athletes reposting Crockett's verse-laced mic drop as if it were a lyric itself. Political commentators, both progressive and moderate, debated whether the moment would mark a shift in tone for Congress, or if it would simply become another flashpoint in the culture wars. Yet, the most powerful responses came not from pundits or celebrities, but from everyday people. Across comment threads, immigrant families, young activists, and workers who had long felt dismissed by politics shared their own stories. She stood up to her the way I wish I could stand up to my boss, one wrote. Another said, my parents came here believing truth mattered. Tonight, Jasmine made us believe again. It wasn't just admiration, it was validation. Crockett's words became a vessel for the frustrations of millions who had watched spin dominate headlines, who had felt truth drowned out by louder, slicker voices. For them, this was more than politics. It was personal. Memes flooded the internet. Conway edited into a silent cartoon bubble, while Crockett's quote flashed in bold letters. TikTok creators remixed the moment into songs. On Instagram, Artists sketched dramatic portraits of Crockett mid-speech, haloed by her words. The energy was less about one politician versus another, and more about a cultural sparker. Sense that something had shifted in the narrative of who gets to command the floor. In the end, the clash between Kellyanne Conway and Jasmine Crockett was never just about one exchange of words on the floor of Congress. It was about two forces colliding: spin against truth, manipulation against courage. Conway represented the polished veneer of politics as performance, the art of twisting narratives until the truth became unrecognizable. Crockett, in contrast, embodied something older, something deeper, the raw lived authenticity of a voice forged in struggle, sharpened by sacrifice, and rooted in an unshakable belief that democracy only works when truth is spoken plainly. What made her response so powerful wasn't just the sharpness of her words or the timing of her delivery. It was that every syllable carried the weight of experience. She wasn't drawing from talking points drafted by aides or focus grouped lines designed to dodge accountability. She was drawing from the courtroom, from community fights, from battles for justice that had demanded everything of her long before she ever stepped into the halls of Congress. That authenticity turned her rebuttal into something bigger than a moment hit, turned it into a movement. Real credibility, Crockett proved, doesn't come from a rehearsed grin or a viral soundbite polished for television. It comes from the courage to look arrogant in the eye and speak with the authority of lived truth. It comes from refusing to be diminished, even when the weight of history, power, and privilege press down. And in that chamber, on that day, Crockett reminded America that dignity can be a weapon far sharper than any spin. The lessons stretched beyond politics. It was about the values that thread through the fabric of democracy itself: justice, equality, truth. Those are not abstract ideals. They live in the way we defend one another, in the way we hold power accountable, in the way we refuse to let lies stand unchallenged. Crockett's stand became a reminder that democracy isn't safeguarded by silence or politeness, it is safeguarded by courage, by the audacity to demand better. Her voice, in that moment, was more than her own. It was a voice for those long dismissed, a voice for immigrants who had been told to stay quiet, for workers who had been ignored, for women who had been underestimated. It was proof that representation isn't just about presence, it's about power. And as the echoes of that chamber still reverberated across the nation, one truth became clear. If one fiery voice could shake Congress to its core, imagine what millions could do together. Kellyanne Conway came into that chamber, armed with her signature dismissiveness, confident that her spin would dominate, as it always had. But this time, she faced Jasmine Crockett, and the result was unforgettable. In a single, blistering exchange, Conway was left stunned, her arsenal of polished phrases shattered by Crockett's calm, unshakable truth. This wasn't just politics. This was courage backed by truth. It was the reminder America needed, that authenticity can slice through spin, that dignity can silence arrogance, and that when a voice like Crockett's rises, it doesn't just defend herself, it defends us all. Moments like this prove something bigger. Power trembles when truth is spoken. And that is exactly why voices like Jasmine Crockett's must not only be heard, but amplified. Because every time someone like her stands up, millions watching at home feel seen, validated, and inspired to demand better. If you believe in that kind of courage, if you believe in truth over spin, in dignity over manipulation, then join this channel, subscribe, share this story, and help make sure voices like Jasmine's echo far beyond one chamber, one clash, or one night.